China is going to be the biggest unknown for 2024. And as we've seen in 2023, it's been by far the largest bullish confidence trap. So we thought China was going to reopen after the pandemic. We thought oil demand was going to have this very springy V-shaped recovery. And it's to borrow the IEA's terminology, it has been a very bumpy road, in particular in that region. So we're looking on a daily basis at traffic across all sectors. We're looking at road, we're looking at aviation, and we're seeing exactly the demand for which fuels. And we're, again, penciling in about 600,000 barrels per day of oil demand growth out of China for 2024. And much of that is dependent on how the economy performs. And will people get on planes? Will there be aviation demand in 2024? So there's, of course, some downside risk to that view.
OK, and then what about the European story, Louise? We've been dealing with some weakness or ongoing weakness in European data, really, for some time. Where does the European demand story feature in your thinking?
Well, I think the particular weakness that we've seen in oil prices in the past, let's call it like 2 months, that has really been less looking east, but more looking west. So that has been in part due to some of the refinery outages across Europe and the lower and sort of, we can call it actually weak and soft refining margins, both in the US and Europe. So refineries in the US and Europe have seen these, low, gasoline, diesel prices. I think even in the US, we're at a 6-month low. We're at $3.20 per gallon for gasoline, which is great for the consumer. But if you're on the other side of it, if you're a refiner, you have to make some tough decisions. And you can either decide to run a bit less crude, or you can try to, run the same amount of crude and then hope that you can find a home for these refined product exports. And so far, we've seen a continued weakening in these margins, and then refiners having to make, similarly rationalized decisions based on this.
Louise, when you think about OPEC Plus, they've been, at least rhetorically, out front talking about the unity that they have around these continued cuts into 2024. But we know there are cracks. We know there are divisions. How are you thinking about the risk that OPEC Plus unity breaks down in 2024?
I think that the schism is maybe an overplayed story. I do think that the unity between the production group is quite robust. And really what they're up against now is sort of the growth of U.S. shale. And it's a slightly different story than it was 2 or 3 years ago when OPEC could sort of, pull the trigger on supply and then actually have a reaction from U.S. shale. And it's a bit different this time around simply due to the fact that there are sanctions against Russian barrels, and this isn't going to have the same impact as it did 2 or 3 years ago. And then on the other side of the OPEC plus equation is, of course, Iran. And that oil lever is as well, you have to look west. You have to look to the U.S. election in 2024. Under the last 2 years of the Biden, the last 2 to 3 years of the Biden administration, we've seen Iran, be able to extremely ramp up their oil production. And whether that's going to be allowed to sort of be continued into 2024 and thereafter is very much going to sort of depend on what's happening in Washington.
What kind of response do you expect to see then, Louise, from U.S. shale coming on the back of COP28 and the agreements that were made there, of course?
We at U.S. shale is we're talking already about the third wave, and it's not going to be as strong as sort of the second boost in production that we saw. But we are already past 13 million barrels per day in U.S. production, and we're looking at a potential growth of another 500,000 barrels per day, even next year. But yes, you are correct that eventually the group of producers in the U.S. is going to have to look at their emissions, and they're going to have to put together a corporate strategy that is taking into account these new COP28 promises and expectations.